Okay, I think we are going to get started here. Thanks so much to everybody who is here, and we're kicking off the New Normal series here at Resource Recycling. My name is Dan Leif. I'm the managing editor at Resource Recycling magazine, and we're really excited to launch this series looking at the realities of municipal recycling in the era of COVID-19. Certainly don't need to tell you all the ways that this world and this industry have changed over the last several months. And we're going to be doing a series of web discussions throughout July and August, talking to some experts and others who are going to give us some really interesting analysis and help guide us through these time periods to keep municipal recycling strong now and into the future. Just kind of before we get into the opening session here today, which is called Ask the Giants, where we'll be doing an open Q&A with recycling leaders at a couple of large haulers and processors. I just wanted to kind of give a couple details about the series and supporters that we have with us. So the first is our series collaborator, that's the Recycling Partnership. Thanks so much to them. Great organization that is doing a lot to enhance curbside recycling in the U.S. I'll also note that this morning, the Recycling Partnership officially launched their Polypropylene Recycling Coalition. And with that, some interesting opportunities for MRF grants to process polypropylene plastic more effectively. So I'm sure you'll be seeing more about that. And actually in our chat window, we have a link to a story that we published this morning in our Plastics Recycling Update publication, detailing new opportunity from the Recycling Partnership. So thank you to TRP. We also have platinum sponsors, Harris Equipment, Retract Connect, and the American Chemistry Council. These entities have been big supporters of resource recycling and the industry as a whole for quite a while, and we're really happy to have them with us. They are platinum sponsors for the series, all the sessions across the next couple months. So thank you to Harris, Retract, and ACC. And then our silver sponsor for today's event is Waste Management. I'm really happy to have them on board, a large processor and hauler, and we're going to be hearing a lot more about waste management as the discussion goes forward today. So thank you to Waste Management. Just a few things to make sure we're all on the same page here. As I said, this is not going to be presentation based today. It's going to be totally question and answer, and I've got a number of questions that I'll be interested to talk with our panelists with today. But anything that you have, please go ahead and use the Q&A portion of the platform on the right side of your screen. You ask the questions, type them in there, and then they'll come into us, and then I'll be able to go through and put some of those to our speakers. Also, so you know, we are recording the event today, and will be available for you later on. And then definitely want to just give a reminder that look next year for the 2021 Resource Recycling Conference. I'm not going to sit here and pretend that I can predict what the world is going to be looking like in 2021, but we are definitely committed to continuing to have these kinds of conversations and connecting the industry in whatever way is relevant and safe for us all. And so keep an eye on rrconference.com, and we look forward to seeing you in some capacity at the 2021 Resource Recycling Conference. And so with that, let's move into our discussion. We have Brent Bell. He's the Vice President of Recycling at Waste Management, the country's largest publicly traded hauler and processor. I believe recycling revenues for Waste Management in 2019 were just over $1 billion. They operate just north of 100 MRFs. That includes construction and debris facilities. And so we have Brent here to kind of give us the perspective from that company. He's been at Waste Management his entire career in recycling. That amounts to about 23 years. So again, Brent Bell, Waste Management, happy to have you.
Thank you. Thank you.
And alongside him, we have Dan Kurtz. Dan, your mic might be muted, FYI. He is the Director of Recycling at Waste Connections. They are, I believe, the third largest publicly traded hauler in North America. Recycling revenues in 2019 around $64 million, and they operate more than 60 MRFs in the US. At least that was the last official count I saw. Dan has been in the industry for, like Brent, around 25 years, and he's been at Waste Connections for 7 years. So good to have you, Dan.
Good to be here.
All right. So let's get into it. I was wondering if you could both, just in a general sense, talk about what the biggest shifts you've seen, at your companies since COVID-19 became a huge reality starting around March. And maybe we can start with you, Brent.
Sure. Dan, thanks for having us here. Always a pleasure, and I'm glad all the audience members were able to hopefully safely attend and watch this event. So excited to be here. On the COVID-19 stuff, the first thing I'll say is there's kind of two things that happened. One is we had to address the safety of our workers that are on the front line. They're really our frontline heroes that go out and do this job every day. And it was, we're used to protecting them from equipment, from machinery, but to protect them from this, invisible, virus, if you will, on COVID-19, we really had to, think about some alternative approaches so that they could work safely in this environment. And whether that's, plexiglass, barriers, social distancing, staggering meal breaks and safety meetings are all something that we had to take in consideration, so that we can make sure our workers were showing up to work, safely. And then the second piece that I thought was really interesting during this time is what we saw with the supply chain. So I think initially there was a lot of, municipalities and third-party haulers saying, should I continue recycling collection services, in light of all this unknown that's out there? And we got an overwhelming response from our customers. Think about the paper mills that were saying, hey, we really need this material. These hospitals that need to be, stocked with their supplies, grocery stores that need supplies, those are all delivered in cardboard boxes. And I think a lot of people probably didn't realize, or maybe they took for granted that, they could just use virgin materials. But as you know, in the last decade, there hasn't been any virgin mills that got built, and they're all recycled mills that rely on, curbside recycling programs to feed their materials. So I think the one thing we learned that was a big takeaway was that recycling is in fact an essential service and critical to these supply chains.
Great, thanks, Brent. And one follow-up: did you have to actually close down any facilities, as this pandemic took hold, or what does that look like?
Yeah. So fortunately for us, the majority of our facilities were able to remain open. There were some California closures that we encountered early on, just because there was a lot of local ordinances, shelter-in-places that we were kind of trying to manage through at the time. So we did have some suspension of our California operations, but the other and those are open again. They opened up in June, and then the other facilities remained open through this. And so we worked through all the ups and downs of it, but really can't get enough thanks to the frontline employees that made this happen.
Great. And Dan, how about you? What have the biggest shifts been for Waste Connections over this time period?
Really a lot of the same things that Brent talked about. Our companies really, it was impressive to see the collaboration between the larger processors out there, which was very important, is to share information and work together to find the best solutions. Pretty uncertain times, so having the best information possible was important and continues to be. So, many of the same things: the social distancing, the hygiene, the physical barriers. We had a few facilities that had to curtail operations because they weren't able to physically separate people, at least for a short time. we had a few places where we had some infections where out of an overabundance of caution. In some cases, we pulled back and ran skeleton crews. But as as Brent said, really those frontline folks and our facility managers did an exceptional job of preparing plans for what to do. Contingency plans, developing, how can we process with a limited crew, so that it was pretty seamless as things transitioned and as things developed. And very inspiring to see the work that they were able to do. And one of the things that, obviously safety is our number one value, and we're trying to help all of our employees, develop a culture of safety where it's not just something you turn on when you clock in and turn off when you clock out, right? This virus has really driven that home, in that in most cases where we did have positive tests and infected employees, most of those, if not all of those, were contracted outside of the workplace. So maintaining that hygiene and that social distancing and being careful outside of work was really driven home, and it's a safety culture that we're striving to develop in all of our folks.
And you both mentioned kind of taking steps and to implement social distancing, at your facilities or within your workforce. And I'm kind of wondering, at a MRF, where was that the most challenging? I've heard from some folks that the break room was particularly hard, and others certain points, on the sortation line. I'm wondering if you guys could maybe elaborate a little bit on, at the MRF, where has social distancing been the hardest?
Yeah, I'd say break room, definitely. We never seemed to have enough space, and so getting people breaks was really one of the first hurdles that we tried to get over. So, putting tents up, creating areas outside, additional tables, opening up conference rooms, things like that, and staggering those breaks was the challenge. And they've done a good job out there.
Yeah, and I just add, I agree. The break rooms, and making sure they understood that the 6 foot distancing is what's kind of required and best for their health and safety, as well as the other folks that are there. The one probably challenge that we faced the most, it seemed like, wasn't necessarily the at work environment. It was almost, when they were getting out of their cars in the parking lot, or the carpooling, things of that nature. And so really just trying to make sure that they knew, that the actions that they take from the workplace, the same safety precautions need to happen at home, or else they could contract the virus, within friends or family members when they're not at work, and potentially bring the virus into work. And so we want to make sure that they were aware those safety procedures need to be followed at home as well.
And then to talk a little bit specifically about the material side of all this, have a question from the audience. What has happened to contamination since stay-at-home took effect? Are you guys seeing more contamination in the residential stream?
Yeah, I'll take a stab at it. So our contamination has, I would say, been relatively flat. So it's come down. I think at the peak in 2018, we're at like 25% contamination. We're a little bit below 20% now. We have seen an increase in, not necessarily by weight, so that's why the numbers are still relatively flat, but a slight increase in the amount of like gloves and masks we're seeing in the recycling programs. And so we've had to do education campaigns to remind folks, hey, to properly dispose of those. They don't belong in the recycling bin. But by weight, the contamination levels have been relatively flat over the past few months for us.
That's our experience as well. Volumes are up, but contamination is relatively flat.
Volumes are up relatively flat. And Brent, when you said about 20%, that's across your facilities nationwide.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's our national average. We have some, obviously, that could be 40%, and some that are around 10.
Right. And then what have things looked like when it comes to offices and a lot of commercial establishments being closed, so the tonnages in the that commercial stream being quite a bit lower. And then I've heard a number of reports of the residential stream tonnages being higher, as I think you alluded to, Dan. And maybe we can start here. Dan, what have you seen on that shift from commercial to residential tonnages, and what does that mean for Waste Connections?
Early on, we saw, almost a complete stoppage of most of our commercial volume, but that's come roaring back. So it's recovered quite nicely. And so I think we're seeing fairly normal numbers at this point as far as the difference between residential and commercial. There's still a few businesses that haven't started back up, but they're definitely getting much closer to normal.
And Brent, what have you seen?
Yeah, so on our side, we saw probably at its peak, some of our commercial volumes were down, nearly 25% on the recycling side. And then on the residential volumes, what I always say is on a per household basis, the volumes are up just because so many folks are working from home and doing online shopping at home. But net, our residential business, we've had a lot of municipalities and even some third-party haulers that are customers of our facilities that had to suspend their operations. In some cases, they had some drivers that came down with it, so they had to suspend recycling and focus on MSW. So overall, our residential is down slightly, but again, that's somewhat picked back up as these residentials and third-party haulers have come back online. But that was net though, residential volumes were down for us.
And then early on, there was quite a bit of talk in the industry about fears of the virus actually being on recyclables that would be coming into facilities. And it seems like that conversation has toned down a little bit over the last several months. But I'm wondering what that looked like for your companies when you were first, encountering COVID-19, something that new for all of us, and you had to determine whether it was safe to bring things into your facility. What did that look like, and what kind of conclusions did you come to? And we can start with Dan.
That was something that created a lot of fear among the frontline people. At first, they were seeing the headlines and hearing the news. The CDC and OSHA were recommending that the PPE that we were already using was sufficient and would protect the employees. Obviously, we did a lot of research, read a lot of articles, trying to figure out, consulted with a lot of experts to, really figure out what was the best way to protect our folks. As you said, that fear has waned, but that hasn't changed our, efforts to make sure that we're continuously scouring the expert articles out there, making sure that our folks are as safe as possible, and continuing to monitor the correct use of PPE, proper hygiene, all the above, to make sure that even if it is a slight risk, that it's a risk that we eliminate as much as possible.
And Brent, do you have anything?
Yes, I'll just add to that. So early on, we read the same articles, Dan, that you were referring to on, can it, remain on cardboard and things like that. And so one of the things we told our employees is we're going to strictly adhere to, CDC and OSHA guidelines. And they had maintained that it was consistently safe for, waste and sanitation workers to handle this material. Our employees wear, gloves and a proper, mask and glasses and things of that nature, and, are told, wash their hands. And I would say that if you look at, each case we have obviously gets researched and studied on back to the origins. And we have no cases from any recycling worker getting that from a material that they were handled at work.
And kind of keeping on the materials discussion here, I have a question from the audience about single-use disposable items. Certainly, we're seeing maybe a rise in the use of single-use plastics and other items as just businesses and others are adjusting to the reality and trying to figure out what's safe and what's viable. Are you all seeing an increase of these types of products in the recycling stream? I know you mentioned kind of the masks and the gloves and those kind of things, but are you seeing an increase in disposable cutlery or plates or anything along those lines that seems noticeable and could maybe be attributed to some of the trends in the marketplace?
Yeah, I'll that one. So I think that, what we have seen on a per household basis, cardboard increase, just because the additional online shopping. I do think that as you see, some of these either, single-use plastics, they were kind of under fire for so long. That's kind of come back where, you're seeing more and more of the, bottles and things of that nature. And interesting enough for us, we kind of looked at some stats this morning. We actually saw an uptick in glass of all things. So I think a lot of folks are staying at home drinking a lot more. It looks like from our data.
Yeah, I'd echo that same information. We're not seeing a huge shift in the percentages of plastics, and really that's because as people are at home, we think they are definitely drinking more. There's more glass, but there's also more water bottles, soda bottles, aluminum cans. But because of the online deliveries or at-home deliveries, the cardboard's up as well. So, fiber versus bottles and cans has stayed relatively flat for us.
Interesting. And yeah, actually, that's the first I've heard about, noticeable increases in glass. That makes sense. I'm curious, what kind of reaction do you guys have as processors? I know there's a lot of different sentiments when it comes to handling that and recycling that right now, and obviously depends often on your region and your end markets. But as a whole, are you guys excited to see more glass in the stream, or a little bit apprehensive about that? Dan?
No, we're not too excited. Obviously glass is infinitely recyclable. It's in all of our MRFs are prepared to handle glass. There's a very few number of MRFs that we operate that have a positive revenue stream for glass. So, and obviously glass gets in everything. If you go into a MRF, every square inch of the facility, if there's glass in that single stream, you're going to find bits and pieces of glass everywhere. Not a huge issue on the quality side, but just a bit of a maintenance issue, a safety issue. And it's not a huge revenue generator, so it's difficult to get real motivated or get excited about seeing more glass.
Thanks. Brent,
yeah, on our side, I'd say, we've changed a lot of our contracts so that we're, pretty transparent with our inbound customers, those municipalities, on the value of that material. And so it's somewhat a pass through on the glass side. Now, the one thing I would say that would help out the economics of it is, as Dan mentioned, it's for the most part a negative value commodity. Is if we could get the demand up and perhaps the beer and the wine industry utilize more recycled content and drive some of that demand, because there are certain parts of the country really that don't have a good demand for glass, and so so that's that's probably the biggest issue I have with it, is just we'd like to see the demand pick up for that.
And I'll chime in here too and note that there is an organization called the Glass Recycling Coalition, and they just started a certification program to try to be, in some ways, addressing some of these issues in terms of glass processing and I think developing some more markets. And we wrote a story about it in Resource Recycling yesterday. So if you haven't looked at your newsletter yet, you should do that. But certainly, as this discussion is showing, there's lots of different talking points when it comes to glass right now, and important subject for a lot of reasons. So yeah, thanks for all that material talk, guys. Appreciate it. I wanted to turn now maybe to what COVID is meaning for haulers, processors, and the communities that you work with. Anytime that there are changes in the realities of the economics of recycling or really anything else that can be felt at the contract level. And have a few questions here, relating to that. And what are you guys foreseeing when it comes to contracts with the communities moving forward? And maybe we can start with you, Brent.
Yeah. So I guess with COVID, one of the big things we did notice was, and this isn't necessarily contract specific, but we saw a lot of communities, again, question their, whether they should suspend their recycling programs. And so making sure that they knew recycling was an essential service was kind of one of the first steps. I think it was somewhat surprising that, some communities just thought, oh, whoever's using my material now could just easily use virgin. I don't need to supply that, for the next couple of weeks. And so they didn't really think too much about suspending those programs until we kind of came in and reiterated that was the, keep those programs going on, and we need to make sure that recycled material continues to flow. In terms of the contracts, we've been, continuing to push the, processing fee first program. And essentially, if there's money left over, where commodity values are higher than that processing fee, then that money gets shared back with the local generated customer or that municipality. And if there's not enough money to cover the processing costs, and that's where the municipality would need to come in and help, pay essentially what would be looked at as a tip fee for that program. So one of the big pieces that we've done is just try to say, hey, to get the economics more favorable for these municipalities, we've got to find really good end markets and demand for this material to try to drive the prices up so that the economics work back for those municipalities to generate the materials in the first place. So that's what one part we've been working really hard on.
Brent, Dan, you have thoughts on this?
Yeah, not a lot to add to that. I think that the China ban on recyclables really started a process that flowed into the COVID-19 response, and you really mirror what Brent said about partnering with municipalities and making sure that we're not relying on commodity values to operate a MRF. So going forward, that part is already kind of in play. We need to make sure that, and we saw, great cooperation and collaboration with our municipal partners anywhere where we had disruptions. So, that even where contracts were somewhat silent on that or were gray areas, it'd be something moving forward as contracts are written, would be to make sure that any future similar situations would be dealt with at the contract and not left out to be determined when the unimaginable happens, so to speak. So,
so is that something where, for example, COVID kind of took hold, and then for whatever reason, a municipality just didn't have the staffing capability to be collecting recycling, and so that sort of became a gray area of the contract, or are you thinking of a different type of scenario?
I think all the above, right? There's collection issues at times, if drivers are out sick. There's also staffing issues at the MRF as far as whether we continue to process. Questions of whether it's safe to process. So, if we've got a section in a contract that allows for negotiating the stoppage or curtailing what's being processed, I think that's just a smart move for future pandemics or future issues that may arise.
And did you guys see a whole lot of the communities that you work with, for one reason or another, kind of suspend recycling? I guess from my perspective, saw a number of news reports about that, often in smaller areas, not a whole lot of very large cities. But what did you guys see about municipalities needing to stop recycling, and how did you go about that communication process with them?
It was spotty, really. We didn't see a whole lot in our markets. Obviously, we're a lot smaller facility-wise than Waste Management, so the impact was relatively small. But we did have some locations where, and there were news articles out there where you had certain labor pools that were unavailable and we had to shut down, or there was it was only most of our smaller communities where we had they didn't have the resources to continue to collect, or there was a couple areas where we didn't have the staffing to process. So it was a mixed bag, but it was generally well received by our municipalities. We were able to roll with the punches and adapt. Right? It's all about that communication, and that's really the key, right? We were up front. We started early and communicated often, and that really resolved any of the issues along the way.
Thanks.
Yeah, Dan, I'd say from our side, it was, whether it's local third-party haulers or the municipalities that had their own trucks, we encountered a few instances where, essentially their driver pool had to be quarantined because of, maybe one or two folks that were out sick, and that potentially could have, got those other drivers sick. And so that's where we saw predominantly a lot of our stuff. And it was hard because, what else can you say when they say, hey, half our folks are out sick or they're in quarantine? And so we suspended our recycling routes. So it's completely understandable and something that's somewhat unprecedented what we've seen with this pandemic. And I think now most of those routes are back on track.
Great. And then, we've touched on end markets a little bit in a few different capacities here, but we wanted to spend some time really diving into that a little bit. Brent, you mentioned kind of talking with municipalities and underscoring the fact that right now manufacturers need this material perhaps more than ever. I think particularly maybe on the fiber side. But I was wondering if you could detail a little bit. Were you talking mainly about getting OCC and mixed paper or other grades into the paper pipelines so that this box manufacturing could continue domestically to get products out to consumers, or did you see that with other materials as well?
Yeah, so I think during the COVID crisis, the paper side was the one that had the strongest demand pool. But I think if you look back even before COVID, when you looked at the economics of a lot of these recycling programs, which with the average commodity price being pretty low, well lower than the processing cost side, then we knew a lot of our generating customers were struggling. And so a couple things that we decided to really push and support the demand for brand owners that are using recycled material, manufacturers using recycled content. And so trying to highlight those customers, we saw that was an important piece. And so I'll give you a couple examples. Whenever we talk at for the EPA for America Recycles Day, the federal government is one of the largest purchasers of material in the U.S. Right? In their procurement practices, make sure that they put in there that their suppliers use recycled material for whatever they're purchasing, whether it's carpet for a new facility, whether it's boxes for the United States Postal Service. If they use recycled content, that's going to help out a lot. Local municipalities can do the same thing if they want to improve the economics of the recycling program. Support and buy and force those suppliers to use recycled content. One example is the shirt I'm wearing today is made from plastic bottles from one of our customers, Unify, who supplies the yarn to Bermuda Sands. And so, even the clothes you wear, it can have that. And then the final message I'll leave you with is waste management. We signed the Plastics Challenge to make sure our procurement processes were using recycled content. And we partnered with Cascade Cart Solutions earlier this year. They now have a cart called the Eco Cart that's made out of post-consumer recycled material. And so those are the carts we use for our recycling and MSW programs today. So everybody can do their own little part in there, whether it's a consumer, the next purchase that they use, make sure they have recycled content all the way to the federal government on the next big contract they have. But that's what's really going to help out the economics, in my opinion.
Dan, do you have thoughts about that? Kind of trying to work with and integrate, those end market buyers, or how to stimulate that?
Oh, really, I think our focus has been on moving towards domestic, customers, and we've done very well at that. And there's going to be times here and there where you've got some additional loads where you're sending those offshore. But for the most part, all of our material is now going domestic or to domestic outlets. And so quality is really the key there, is to produce a quality material that's usable in those domestic facilities. And that quality being something that will also create additional demand for the material, right? If it's not, if it doesn't conform to what our customers are really looking for, then they can't develop the additional content, recycled content in their products. So that's been a big focus of ours, is to really respond to what the market is offering and be able to produce the quality that allows us to sell to anyone in every market. And that's really paid off throughout this whole process. We've had no, we've not had to stockpile anything. Everything that we produce is moving out the door and moving, pretty regularly. So it's been good, and it's something that we've focused on over the last 5 or 6 years, is trying to develop that domestic market.
Are there any materials in particular that you found are hard to keep in the domestic system to find buyers for?
No, actually not. We've been able to move everything domestically. Surprisingly, all of our plastics are staying domestic. Occasionally we'll ship some loads of fiber, SRPN, especially here and there. We ship to India, but most of it's staying domestic. And that demand continues to increase here in North America.
Is that something that you've seen as well, Brent? Has that been a shift Waste Management has done? I mean, in the wake of all of the kind of export uncertainty out there, have you done a similar thing, keeping more in the U.S. market?
Yeah. So, and we kind of divide it into two buckets, like Dan mentioned as well. Is all of the plastics that we deal with on the residential side have stayed domestic and have stayed domestic for the last 2 years. We actually came out with a policy in 2019 just to kind of solidify it, that no recycled plastic from residential programs would be exported, and we've had good markets for those here domestically. On the fiber side, obviously a little bit different story. We were, like a lot of folks in the world, a big global supplier to China. They had the largest appetite for so many years. And so when they started scaling back, late 2017, banning mixed paper, and then now leading all the way up to a complete ban in 2021, then we found alternative markets for that material. And then obviously we're seeing a lot more domestic capacity expansion here as well. And so, essentially there's a little bit of a gap between when China left off and when these other projects potentially come online. But we do think that gap will be filled, and more materials will stay domestically, more jobs will be created here domestically. And so, that's great with us, because, selling our end products to a domestic buyer makes it a lot easier to travel down the road and check on how things are going.
And Brent, you had mentioned a little bit earlier about integrating with the Us Epa and some conversations with them. And actually our top upvoted question here is, I've heard that the federal government will be publishing a draft national recycling strategy soon. I think that's supposed to be coming out in September, if I remember correctly, from the EPA. And so the question is, have your companies been involved in formulating this? And is there any info that you might have about what this national recycling strategy could entail?
Yeah, the one thing I'll say, we have worked closely with the EPA over the years. They're really a great partner, and I would say they are essentially on the same page as we are, which is increased demand, help the economics of these small recycling programs. They want to see all the right things for the environment, obviously, and for a lot of these municipalities, they have these goals. They want to see those goals get met, and so they bring a lot of diverse folks in the room to talk about how that supply chain can meet the goals that quite honestly that the nation has. And so I think they have a good plan of action, and we're definitely supportive of the EPA's efforts.
Dan, do you have thoughts on that, a national recycling strategy, and have you guys been consulted on that at all?
We're working with the national waste associations to really kind of push that legislation, but more working on the the industry side to help develop the demand, right? And it's something that you see a lot in the news. There's a lot of conversations around circular economy, and that's something that we're very committed to. Obviously, if it's something that our customers want, it's something that we're going to work hard at. And really, that collaboration between industries, where we're helping to close that loop, is extremely important. And there's quite a bit of activity going on out there. There's collaboration all over the place that's developing, and we see that as a very healthy approach to creating that scenario. Whether there's national legislation, that's going to be tough because there's so many opposing opinions and differing goals there. But really, it's something that we produce as MRF operators, a valuable commodity. It's a raw material that and it's good for the environment, which is something that everybody wants to create a more sustainable packaging type, and to collaborate with those that are the producers, the package manufacturers. And that's one of the things that we could do a lot better job of is working with those that are creating the packaging to make sure that those new package types or new products are recyclable, that they can be recycled at the MRF. And so as we've been, as an industry, sometimes blindsided by changes to packaging, that we really need to close that loop and be working with those producers and packagers to make sure that those products are truly recyclable.
Do you feel like that dialogue, has improved or is improving when it comes to working with packaging producers? Because that's something that I've heard a lot, certainly through the years too, and it often seems like a start and stop type conversation. There's just different incentives at play for the recycler and then for the company putting packaging on the market and wanting their stuff to sell. So what are you seeing in those conversations?
I mean, I'm seeing some building momentum and some real change that's starting to get exciting. There's a lot of work left to do, but I think we're getting close to that kind of a critical mass that's going to really affect some positive change.
And you mentioned that MRFs create a valuable commodity, putting it out there, and that I thought that's a nice segue to maybe really talk about what to expect from markets for these different commodities in the coming years. Pulling this back, I think, more directly to the pandemic and economic uncertainty. What are you guys seeing over the rest of this year when it comes to OCC pricing, for example, or other major commodities? What trends do you think are going to be really factoring into that? And maybe we can start with you, Brent.
Yeah, that's a great question. The one thing that I can tell you about any price projections is I can guarantee they're going to be wrong. So there's no question about that. I would say, if you looked at the last few years, and so here's what's somewhat interesting, and I'll stick with kind of OCC, for example. Since China told the World Trade Organization they were going to start limiting and restricting their imports, the domestic OCC price went from $120 a ton to 2019 averages $30 a ton, and so you saw 80-90% reduction when China pulled out of the market essentially, and then they'll be completely out in 2021, right? So the pessimist side says that's probably not a good thing for prices until this domestic capacity gets built back up again, and so I think as you look out in that trajectory, you've got to see probably not going back to the peak of cardboard prices for quite some time. Again, that's where we really try to isolate and look at each commodity type and say, hey, can we drive demand for this? And I do think there's some good examples. If you look at what happened with natural high density plastics, we saw some brands and manufacturers commit to using more recycled material in their products. We saw the demand for natural go up and the prices went up accordingly. And I think at one point in the last 6 months, natural HD was actually higher than aluminum. And so I think that you can pick some good stories out and say, see, look, driving the demand really does help out, right? If, as a consumer, you can ask your favorite brands to use recycled content, and they're forced to go out in the marketplace and buy that recycled material, then I do think that it'll help out with economics eventually. So that's where we're kind of committed to staying down that path so that our generating customers can get the highest value for their materials.
Dan, what do you think on the markets front looking into that Waste Connections crystal ball?
Yeah, well, I'm glad you asked Brent to answer that question first. He's absolutely right. If you got a model on pricing, it's guaranteed to be wrong. And that's been a struggle, right? It'd be great if we had some stability there, but fortunately and unfortunately, we deal with a commodity that's going to move with demand and supply. So that I think will stay somewhat. It's definitely going to be low for a while until the demand comes up. I think that in a lot of ways that we as consumers can have a big impact. When we're getting materials or we're getting products delivered to our home and they show up in a packaging type that is not recyclable at the curb, or maybe not recyclable at all if it's a combination of fiber and plastic film or bubble wrap, we need to make our voices known. We need to complain about that and make sure that we're pushing back on those types of things, right? That'll create the demand that we need. When you look at moving away from a cardboard box that's recyclable in virtually every curbside program throughout North America, probably worldwide, that's a head scratcher, right? We're trying to be more sustainable, and yet we're moving. And I get it, right? There's cost associated with it. There's reasons why those packaging changes are made. But if we understand that our packaging is 100% recyclable, that'll be heard, and that'll make a difference.
And then we have one question that's specifically asking about color Hdpe. Brent, you had mentioned natural Hdpe, which has seen a pretty substantial historic price rise, actually. And like you said, often tied to the fact that brand owners are making more commitments. Natural HD is one that does lend itself well to moving back into packaging. Colored HD, a little bit harder because of the color element. And prices have been low for that type of material. Do you guys have any thoughts on colored HDPE? Would it be better if that was all transferred to natural colored plastic, or any thoughts there?
Yeah, I mean, from a selfish pricing perspective, it'd be nice if it was all natural, but I think just the nature of products, that's really never going to happen. The one thing, obviously, we have a good markets in the kind of the agriculture and the piping industry for the colored HD, but as you mentioned, natural HD is essentially a universal donor, right? You can turn natural HD into a lot of different colors and things of that nature, and so that's why the value for that is higher. But I completely understand why folks that make products, can't always use a natural type color, and that's definitely they're part of their brand, and so yeah, not an easy question, I guess, to answer, but there's probably likely always going to be a pretty large gap between natural and color HD.
Anything to add, Dan?
I think we don't like the price when it's low, but those low prices have benefits as well, right? As the price is low as a raw material, then more people start to use it, which will stabilize that price. So I think if you let the market factors, let supply and demand win, let the free market reign, that we'll see gradual and steady improvement in the price and steady demand for it. We're not sitting on any colored HDPE now; it's being used, so that's a good thing.
And then when it comes to recovering natural, recovering color, recovering OCC, one thing I wanted to touch on was how your MRFs are changing and some of the technology that might be coming into it right now. I'm wondering, what big trends you're seeing in terms of technology in the MRF, and in what ways the pandemic is influencing those trends. Maybe we can start with you, Dan.
Yeah, we're as a recycling group, we definitely recognize that the newest and latest technology is becoming more affordable and it's more effective. And if we can eliminate the risk of having people out in a MRF where there's potential, injury or infection, that there's a lot of momentum in trying to make that happen. Robots are kind of the most popular story today, and they're impressive. There's the vendors out there that are making sorting robots are doing an exceptional job. Prices are getting better all the time. The effectiveness of those robots are getting better, and they have their place, mostly in QC right now, but that's changing. I think a kind of a unheralded side of the technology is the fiber optical sorting capabilities that are out there. When you're looking at, a robot that can do 60 to 80 picks per minute, that's great. But if you can put in an optical sorter that can do over 1,000 picks per minute, more effective. But each of those technologies have their own place within the MRF. And as we kind of start to upgrade our facilities and get more comfortable with the technology, you will definitely see us move in that direction. I think the whole industry is obviously going to move in that direction. Some of the struggles that we're going to face in adding some of this technology is if you've been in most MRFs, they've been upgraded for years and we're pretty packed inside those buildings. So adding additional equipment is probably one of the hardest parts of making that happen, is going to be figuring out where to put it in a building and how to retrofit the system to be able to accommodate those additional pieces of equipment. But it's coming for sure.
Great. Brent, you have anything to on that?
Yeah, so Waste Management has continued to invest during these times. I think over the last 2 years, we put about $200 million into the recycling infrastructure. Within about a 9-month period of time, we've got 4 new facilities open up. One of them included is our Chicago facility, which is our largest investment in residential recycling that we've done, and it's a highly automated facility. It's got some equipment, some machinery that can essentially kind of talk to each other. Intelligent sorting type of facility, and that one's been running for a few months now. We're really excited about how that one progresses, and that could be the blueprint for other facilities that we build in the future.
Yeah, certainly heard quite a bit about that Chicago facility. So that's exciting to hear that it is running. And is that up to capacity now, or is it something that you all are still scaling up?
So it still has been scaling up most of the year, but I think July and August we'll hit not capacity levels, but we'll push the limit a little bit more on it, see what it can handle.
Great. Well, we'll look forward to learning more about that for sure. And so we are getting up near the end of the end of the webinar here. But I also wanted to shift and talk about another major societal moment that we're having. There has been the pandemic, and then we've also had the racial justice movement, Black Lives Matter, and certainly that's permeating all of our society, all of our industries. And I was wondering, how your companies are adjusting to that, and I think heeding some calls to look at the realities of race and recycling, and maybe a lack of racial diversity in our industry leadership. Brent, maybe we can start with you. I know that Jim Fish, the CEO of Waste Management, put out a statement several weeks back talking about this issue. I was wondering how Waste Management as a whole is approaching racial justice right now.
Yeah, and I think you're right, Dan. It's a good lead in with it. Jim's statement really cascaded throughout the organization, and with most everything else, people's cultures are set at the top, and Jim has clearly set that tone that inclusion, diversity are going forward are going to be the success of Waste Management. In 2019, we actually hired a kind of inclusion and diversity officer to develop the culture of Waste Management, make sure that everybody was treated with respect and equality was throughout the organization. I think that under Jim's leadership, you can see, our board is at 25%, diversity, and the SLT is at well over 20% diversity. And so I think that as that cascades down, you learn that really successful companies have a lot of diversity and inclusion, and they have a lot of different thoughts that are put into those different levels of the organization. And we're committed to that, and we think that's a critical pathway to success going forward as well. And so Jim's statement, I can't really add on too much more to that other than that's the tone is set at the top, and I think all the rest of the folks in the organization respect that.
And when you said SLT, that's senior leadership team.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Our senior leadership team and the board has both over 20% diversity in it today.
Dan, what about Waste Connections? What kind of conversations have you all had internally, and what does this mean to the company?
Very similar conversations. The industry's about 40% people of color, and our Waste Connections family is very similar, and we're pretty proud of the team that we've got. We're a little bit different, a little bit younger company. When you look at our senior leaders, it's really the same few folks that started the company. But some of the things that we're doing in any company would need to do to help remedy these disparities is to do some training, work with folks on promotion opportunities, helping management recognize opportunities, and really kind of making sure that the folks that are out there that are currently progressing through our management teams, right? We're pretty proud of the fact that we hire from within. And so again, if we're mirroring that 40% number, those are folks that are continually moving up through the ranks. And we got to make sure that we're intentionally looking at opportunities for all of our people, making sure that we're training, making sure that we're developing and encouraging all of our folks to take those opportunities to move up within the company and continue to have opportunities to develop their leadership skills and be promoted.
Got it. We're just have a couple minutes left, so I thought I would open it up to both of you for kind of one final statement of it, and maybe kind of focus specifically around what one or two things can the municipal recycling sector as a whole do to stay strong through this pandemic and through a lot of the uncertainty that no doubt is in front of us. How do we move forward from here? And start with you, Dan.
Yeah, I think for the most part, we need to stay the course. I mean, we've had some major impacts with the China ban, and costs have gone up as we've transitioned to really a service model where we're being paid for the service and we share the commodity value. And as long as the commodity values are less than the cost to process, it's going to be a cost. And I think helping the residents of our various municipalities understand those costs and not go too much into doomsday, right? We've done a good job as an industry of talking about how bad things are, but let's focus on the positives. Let's focus on what's developing in markets and domestic demand. And one piece of advice, instead of throwing out, hey, we're going to spend $1 million more or $500,000 more on our recycling program next year, break it out as a per household cost. Compare that to what it would cost to stop recycling and throw it in the landfill. There's ways to do that, and the impacts are much softer, much more palatable to our residents if we look at it that way versus just throwing a big number out there.
And Brent, last.
So I think that the message we have, it's pretty simple. We're straightforward. It's all about recycling demand. And we had a thing at the sustainability forum earlier this year. The message was recycle demand recycling, and that's what it's all about to help with the values of these programs and the economics. And we really need to support the brands and manufacturers using recycled content. Make sure those are part of our everyday buying habits. So every time you throw a bottle into the recycling bin, then go out and support some brand that's buying that bottle back on the other side of it. And that's what's going to keep these programs alive.
Well, thanks so much to both of you guys. Brent Bell, Vice President of Recycling at Waste Management, Dan Kurtz, Director of Recycling at Waste Connections. This has been a really insightful conversation, and I appreciate both of your time. And appreciate everybody tuning in and joining us. Come back next Wednesday, same time, different link, I think. And we're going to have a great session talking about MRF contracting. So a little bit of what we talked about today, we're going to be doing a whole hour on that. So we will see you then, and stay safe and be well.
Thanks, Dan. Thanks, Dan. See you.
All right. Good to see you, Dan. Thanks. Take care.
Yeah, absolutely.